Hello, welcome back to the channel, and we're doing a little bit of a different kind of video today because today I just competed in a standard RCQ and we got the invite. So this was for the current standard RCQ season, and we will be going to either Portland or Milwaukee. And I'm gonna try to get the second invite as well, and I assume go to both. We'll see. We'll see what kind of happens. I think I'll go to Portland for sure. So I think a little bit of a different video here. We're gonna do a little deck profile, and then I'll also go through the tournament match breakdown of how the tournament went. So bear with me. My recording setup is a little scuffed right now, but hopefully I get the point across. So what deck were we playing today? Well, you know it. You love him. We were playing the big bad of the format, Vivi Cauldron. So we have the Vivi and we have the Cauldron. So this concludes the deck profile. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, obviously this is the big menace of the format. These two cards, if you don't know the interaction, you put the Vivi under the Cauldron, and then all of your creatures start tapping for insane amounts of mana. You have these humongous combo turns. It's really quite ridiculous, honestly. It's just like not a standard power level thing in a standard power level format. So obviously we're running the full 4 of, although I've seen some recent lists. My list was not completely up to date, but there were a few shifts that I made compared to some of the stock lists. And I mean, I had the full 4. I've seen some lists go as low as 2 VV in the main, and then you have the other 2 in the side, because if you're expecting a lot of mirror matches, then you're gonna have, maybe you could just steal theirs. It becomes like a very interesting thing there. But I just played the full 4 of each, because I mean the cards are just absolutely completely broken. So we're gonna break this down. We're gonna start with the threats of the deck, and so to start that off, we'll start off with the 1-drops, and we're playing the full 4 of the Marauding Mako. So Mako is a great 1-drop that combos with a lot of the other cards in the deck. There are a lot of cards that discard, and so I mean, oftentimes they have to spend a real removal spell on the Mako itself, or it'll just kill them. And of course, in the late game, it also cycles, so it's not always a dead draw. And a great enabler for that is we're playing the full 4 of FOMO, or Fear of Missing Out. Again, great card. So Fear of Missing Out, of course, combos well with the Mako, and there are a lot of little sneaky combos in the deck. I mean, it's fairly trivial, not completely trivial, but fairly easy to get Delirium, so you get multiple attacks, and I'll explain a little later with another card in the deck how that can get even more disgusting when you get extra combats. But it also has the kind of Seasoned Pyromancer text, where it's not discard a card, then if you did draw a card, it's just discard then draw. So if you're hellbent when you cast this, and you just draw a card, so that's pretty nice. Also a great way to discard your Vivi into the graveyard, so that way you can eat it with the Cauldron. All right, and then another 2-drop. So there's only a singleton copy. This is the Draconautics Engineer. I used to run 2, but now it's basically just as a one-of, as sort of like a combo piece, and I would cite it out in certain matchups where I didn't think I needed that extra angle. This is another great card to go under the Cauldron, because when you start putting your counters on the creatures, you can start using the exhaust ability. The exhaust abilities only work once per creature per game, essentially, just like the regular card itself. But you can do some truly disgusting things. If you have Vivi and Draconautics Engineer, you start making dragons, hasting them out, and then you get counters in other ways, and then you start making more dragons. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, but just the one of, and like I said, I would cite it out in certain matchups, so maybe we'll get into that when we get to the matchup section. Okay, and then going on to the 3-drops, we have 3 copies of Terza Light Shatter, and 1 copy of Steam Core Scholar. I have seen these numbers kind of flip-flopped around, usually hovering around like about the same 4-ish total copies, maybe 3 Steam Core Scholar if you're expecting a little bit more control and you just maybe they're one-for-oneing you a lot and you need to just draw the answers and see them and then discard, versus Terza is a lot more aggressive and it just gets in there fast and it provides a little bit of extra card advantage as well, because oftentimes you do end up with 7 or more cards in the graveyard. So oftentimes you just get to attack, and even if you get to play a land for free from your graveyard, that's really strong. Sometimes you just get to do absolutely disgusting things, like we'll get into it with the interaction section, but you hit it into the Flood Maw and you just like bounce their creature and you smack them for $1 billion. It's pretty great. And yeah, no, these are great cards. These are great cards. And of course, the more you discard, the more it works with the more it works with a Mako. And then of course you bin your Vivi and then eat it with Cauldron. So yeah, the deck, Vivi Cauldron is disgusting, but everything else just works so incredibly well with that. All right, and then for the threats, one more. We got one of a Quantum Riddler, the Rizzler himself. So I've seen some lists with 0 copies, 1 copy, 2 copies. I kind of wanted to play 2 copies, but I only own 1. I decided to play in the main deck because it's a great mirror breaker. I would side it out, and it's great versus Control too. Like Control has a really hard time dealing with this as long as you like play around their counter spells and whatnot, because it just draws you so many cards. Like even if you just warp it for 2 and you're like Heckbend or whatever, and you draw 2 cards, that is very strong. And then when you play it, you just have this 4/6 flying threat that threatens to draw you a lot more cards as long as you just play out your hand, which this deck is fairly capable of doing, because even its card draw spells that they discard a bunch of cards too, so you end up in that kind of situation. I would side it out quite often. I would side it out in you keep it in the mirror as a mirror breaker, and it's great versus Control, but you're playing against like Dimir Mid or just any other kind of off-brand or aggressive deck. If you play against an aggressive deck or another off-brand mid-range deck, it gets a little worse. So yeah, I do like the one of. I kind of wanted to try 2, but the one of felt pretty good. All right, so now moving on to some of the card draw things. We're playing the full 4 of Prof's Eidetic Memory and full 4 of Winter Night Stories. So let's go ahead and talk about Prof's Eidetic Memory too, because I honestly think this is secretly like the best card in the deck. It is ridiculously strong. So for those who don't know, enters, draw a card, legendary enchantment. You have no maximum hand size. Until I read that right now, I completely forgot that was a thing. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than 1 card, you put X counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn minus 1. So essentially like extra cards. It doesn't count your draw step. So you play a Mako on 1, you play this, you put the counter on the Mako, and that kind of thing. So this card is insane. So there's a few different things. For one, it puts counters on creatures. So it's another way to put +1/+1 counters on your creatures besides the Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So if you already have a Vivi under your Cauldron and then you go to combat and you put counters on another creature, you do your thing, then that creature can start adding mana and you haven't even activated the Cauldron. So yeah, just absolutely ridiculous in that sense. It's also a great combination with, we were just talking about it earlier, with the fear of missing out. Because when you go to, like say you attack and then you untap, you have another combat. This says it triggers at the beginning of combat. It doesn't matter which combat. So you go to your second combat, you put more counters on another creature, and then you get to attack again. Just absolutely insane, disgusting stuff. And this deck, we'll see, draws a lot of cards. So it's very easy to have just very large creatures. And that's the other thing, is that, yeah, Vivi Cauldron is completely disgusting, but it's not necessary to win the game. Because imagine you go Prof's Eidetic Memory on 2, Terza on 3. You discard 2, draw 2. You go to combat, put 2 counters on your Tursa, smack them for 5. Very, very strong. Very, very good card. The other card that we were mentioning that we're playing the full 4 of is the Winter Night Stories. So lots of decks in Standard playing the, the stock up package and whatnot, either stock up or consult star charts. So Winter Night Stories is great for so many reasons. First of all, it just gives you 3 cards and then you discard a creature card. So in this deck, that is almost draw 4 cards because you want to discard Vivi to your graveyard so you can eat it with Cauldron and then start going off. It also has Harmonize for 4 and a blue, so you can cast it from your graveyard, you tap a creature, and then reduce the Harmonize cost by the creature's power. And like I said, you can make your creatures fairly large. And with Vivi, you can add the mana and then tap. It's just pretty gross stuff. So you can basically get these combo turns with Vivi under the Cauldron, where you just Winter Night Stories over and over and over again. Maybe you have a Proph's Eidetic Memory too, just hanging out, and then your creatures just get absolutely massively insanely large and you just smack them to death, or you just build such a crazy board advantage and you interact with all of the things that they're effectively dead. Like maybe you don't actually kill them in combat, but you just you just make the game so insurmountably ahead for you. Yeah, Winter Night Stories, fantastic card. Obviously great versus Control too, just drawing extra cards. Because sometimes you just need that like one card. Maybe you just need that one Torch the Tower or Into the Floodmaw. Spoilers for the next section. But yeah, really stellar card. Great for all the reasons. Discarding cards, of course, good with the Mako. All kinds of great synergies there. This deck is so stupid. Let's go to the interaction suite. So for the interaction, we have 3 copies of Into the Floodmaw, 3 copies of Torch the Tower, 2 copies of Abrade. So let's go through these one by one. We'll start with the Abrades because I think it is the weakest of the 2 or the 3 interaction spells. Also, you may notice they are different arts. I drive my friends nuts because I like to play mismatched arts in my decks. Like, all right, never mind. Anyway, Abrades. So it's good in the mirror because it kills FOMO and it kills Cauldron. And sometimes you play against like random artifact based decks and you can just kill stuff. Like, for example, the new blue-white control card, Pinnacle Starcage, I think it's called, is an artifact. It's basically the temporary lockdown replacement. So at end of turn, you just Abrade that. You get all your stuff back. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, so really good. You side it out in a lot of matchups because oftentimes 3 damage is just not enough to kill what you are looking for, and then the artifact hate doesn't matter. But that card's fine. The card's definitely fine. There's also like another one in the sideboard. We'll get to that for the sideboard. We also have the 3 Torch the Towers. I think this is probably the part of the deck that I disagree with most and I wish I had changed. I do still like Torch the Tower, and there are a lot of aggressive decks where you get to, when you torch and then you kind of get a humongous tempo advantage. Like there are some like Llanowar Elves decks and stuff like that. So obviously, bolting the bird is good. In the mirror, it does hit an early Mako. It also can hit a Tursa or a FOMO if you bargain it, which definitely comes up. And oftentimes I think I'm not aggressive with it enough where you actually sacrifice your own profs, or you sacrifice your own Cauldron or even your own FOMO in order to bargain this thing, in order to deal the 3 damage and get the scry, plus the exiling is relevant. So I think I would not go with the full 3 copies if I were to run this list back, but I still think it's a strong card. Really good versus Dimir mid-range just because they play a lot of little duders that are like 1 or 2 toughness, and you just get to kill them 1 for 1 nice and easily so they can't Kaido or Enduring Curiosity. Oh, this is also a great answer to Enduring Curiosity too, by the way. Like if you bargain it, because then it exiles and then it doesn't come back. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good overall. But overall, I would maybe go down to like maybe 2 copies in the deck, maybe 1. Who knows? And then we'll talk about Into the Floodmaw. This card is so cracked, dude. So 1 mana
Return a creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. That's already not bad. Unsummon, solid. Notably, you cannot target your own things, and sometimes you would want to do that. But overall, this is fairly strong. And by the way, this is the end of the non-land main deck. So anyway, last card we're going to talk about. You can also gift a tapped fish, and then you can bounce anything. So basically, you give them a tapped token, but you can bounce any permanent. There are a lot of crazy permanents that it's really nice to be able to just bounce right away. So, for example, I already talked about Pinnacle, Starcage, or in the mirror, you can bounce their Cauldron so they stop doing combo things. You can also, just the tempo advantage that you gain with this card can be quite strong. It's not always great, for example, against Dimir mid-range. Sometimes they play some big stuff like Preacher or whatever, but a lot of times you don't like giving them like re-enter the battlefield triggers. But again, when you're going on the aggro route, like with the Tursas and the FOMOs and the Profs and stuff like that, just getting that last blocker out of the way, like clean cut no matter what, super strong. Really, really enjoy Flood Maw. So we'll move on to the land base. Not too much, just some normal things. So we'll start with the Manland because I think that's the most important. There are 2 copies of the Soul Stone Sanctuary. Manland's, of course, always great against sorcery speed removal spells. Well, maybe not this one because it becomes a creature permanently. But against control, obviously that's going to be tough for them because then you could just go to their end step, activate, and then it's like a permanent threat that they have to deal with. No synergies with the fact that it's all creature types, but that doesn't really matter. It's just a great threat, and it just slots into your mana base, and your mana is pretty good, so you can afford a couple of colorless lands. So just to have a couple extra threats after they board wipe you, or remove all your creatures, or invalidate them, or whatever, and you just get to play this and like smack them. So that's totally fine. Going into the lands, I mean, nothing crazy here. We've got full 4 of Spire Bluff Canals. We've got full 4 of River Pyre Verge. We've got 2 copies of Surveil Land Thundering Falls. And I believe it's 5. Yeah. Is it 5? Yeah, 5 mountains, 3 islands, and 2 copies of Starting Town just to help out with the mana fixing. I think some lists are probably going down a little bit in non-basics because the color distribution's like fine, and a lot of like the red decks, like the Mono Red Dragons list, they're playing a lot of Sunspine links, for example, so that can be pretty punishing because there's not too many basics in the deck. So anyway, moving on to the sideboard. So for the sideboard, we have the finishing up the playset of the Torch Tower. You would bring this in against the Dimir mid-range deck or any kind of Llanowar Elves deck or something like that. Basically anything where that 2 damage is relevant or the exile is relevant. So something like that. Then we're playing 2 copies of Spell Pierce. It's good in the mirror, and just because it's a nice tempo card, like you can counter their Winter Night Stories or their removal spells or something like that, because mana is very, until they combo or whatever, the mana is very tight. So oftentimes a Spell Pierce is just a 1 mana counter spell, which is great. Sometimes good against control. I'm still not 100% sure how I like the sideboarding there, but theoretically sometimes you have to make them be able to wrath on, like they have to wrath on 4 in order to survive, and if you're holding up a blue, you just like blow them out or something like that. Definitely gets worse later in the game when they start, if the game goes long and then they have like 10, 11, 12 mana, then it gets a little worse, but obviously not bad in the early game. We have a 1, and then we have a few cards that are great at killing big things. So we have Twin Maw Stormbrood, or rather we have the Charring Bite. Like we ignore 75% of this card frame right here, and we just care about the Charring Bite right here, which is 2 mana, deal 5 to creature without flying, or yes. We have 1 of Broadside Barrage and 1 copy of Obliterating Bolt. So these cards are all great against Dimir midrange because one of their best cards against us is the Preacher of the Schism. So being able to cleanly answer Preacher of the Schism is something that is beneficial. You can also bring these in sometimes against control because maybe they'll play Beza and you need to kill Beza because it's a 5 toughness creature or something like that. Broadside Barrage, also nice being instant speed and being able to draw and discard. Again, it helps with the strategy with all those draw and discard synergies I was talking about earlier with the Cauldron and the FOMO and all that. And then I like Obliterating Bolt, especially versus the card Enduring Curiosity, because it's a clean answer, exiles it, gone for good. Very much like that. Sorcery Speed, not so great. Okay, we also have 2 copies of Into the Fire Magic. We have 2 copies of Fire Magic. Flexible board wipe spell, damage based, where for 1 mana, dealing 1 to everything, instant speed, not too bad. I bring it in against Dimir midrange as well as aggressive strategies with low toughness creatures. So, for example, one of the matchups I played against today was Gruul Leyline, and this was great because they tap out, you interact with them, and then for 3 mana you kill all of their 2 toughness creatures and whatnot. So yeah, the Fire Magic does pretty good there. Good against Dimir midrange too, because in the early game they're playing their Spyglass Sirens and their Flood Pits Drowners and all of that good stuff. And this just cleanly answers for a single mana and not too hard to get to 2 mana. Or sorry, not 2 mana, 3 mana total, deal 2 to everything. It's a little harder, obviously. The Faraga mode to deal 3 to each creature for 6 mana. It's a good way to clean up the board when you're already ahead and you're comboing, just to make sure you don't die on the crackback after you're done. But yeah, Fire Magic is pretty solid card. We have a 3rd copy of Abrade, just in case we're in the mirror, you need to kill their FOMOs or their Cauldrons, like I said earlier. We have 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke, really nice against the control decks because it counters their Wraths, it counters their Overlords, it counters quite a lot of stuff. The Meringue River Regent, for example. So yeah, two copies for the control matchups. Also for the control matchups, we have the 2 copies of Ral Crackling Wit, basically a nice plan B for when you're facing against a controlling deck or a heavy removal deck or something like that. So it gets more loyalty as you cast spells. Oftentimes you're just going to play it and immediately downtick because your deck is very powerful. So oftentimes you just need to chain spells together, find what you need. I played against a few control players today. I never upticked. I basically downticked and then played a couple other spells, and Ral essentially gained me some life, found me good cards, and then went from there. Get lots of value. So yeah, Ral's pretty sweet against the control decks. And then to round off the sideboard, we have 2 copies of Annul. So Annul, I was bringing in on the draw in the mirror because if they go turn 2 FOMO or Cauldron or Profs, you just answer it for a single mana, completely backbreaking play that steals the play back to you. It's also good against... Theoretically, it could be good against control too. It's a little weird. I'm not sure how much exactly you want to side into that, because against blue-white control, for example, they play the Overlord, the White Overlord of the Mistmoors, I believe it's called, and then the Pinnacle Starcage that I keep mentioning. So there's that, but mainly I would say it's for the mirror. Really, really nice. I think some lists are actually playing one or 2 in the main deck. And I think back when I was talking earlier, especially if you're expecting a lot of mirror matches in your RCQ or meta, I would consider going a little less on the torches, maybe put them all on the side, and you play some Spearses or some Annuls in the main deck. So that's the deck. So we're gonna need some little background here. Oh yeah, we gotta get our boy Vivi in the frame, as well as his best friend, Agatha Soul Cauldron. we're just going to go through, talk through we're going to go through my full tournament report, and I'll go through all of the different matches and what I can remember from those matches. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and move on to that segment. So for this RCQ, it was a 2 slaughter, meaning that the top 2 players got the invite. It was 6 rounds, 33 players, which, if you don't know, that's the minimum amount of players that you need to have a 6-round tournament as opposed to a 5-round tournament where it's at 32. So that's, a little bit of a long day, but that's okay. More magic, more fun, right? So round 1 and round 2 were versus blue-white control. So what do I remember from these? I remember the round 1, game 1 of the round 1, I got super flooded and I wasn't feeling super great. But then I played some nice tight games. You just pick your moments to combo, playing around the board wipes and using your man lands to help out, and then eventually took that down. Round 2, I went win-win instead of loss-win-win, so I think that one was just a little bit simpler. Obviously, the Rowls did a great job from the sideboard and all of those sideboard tricks that we were doing. So round 3, this was the first loss. So it was loss-win-loss versus Dimir mid-range. So the Dimir mid-range list, of course, playing the typical package of Spyglass Sirens and Flood Pits Drowners and Preachers and Kaidos and all that good stuff. So they're just trying to do your thing. They actually have a decent matchup against Vivi because they just 1-for-1 you a lot. They're able to, if they're careful, they can stop you from comboing and then just go off with the Enduring Curiosity, draw a ton of cards, or Kaido gives them tons of value, and eventually you just die. So it's also pretty tricky. Like, even with the sideboard, they play a lot at instant speed, so there's a lot of back and forth in that way. But with their efficient removal, it can definitely be a tough matchup, and unfortunately we did not get there. So I think but also, if they're not careful, you can just untap and combo kill them. So yeah, it definitely goes both ways. I think in game 3, I definitely did not play the most aggressively that I could have. I had several Winter Night stories in the graveyard, and I just kind of was not activating them. I think I was playing too scared of like a counter spell or something of that nature. So I probably should have just done that, try to get out card them. But yeah, we didn't do that. So round 4, we got a win versus Simic Cookies. So this deck is still around. So it plays the Spyglass Sirens. He was also playing Hemosimic Might, new card from Edge of Eternities, the little 1/1 guy that when you tap it, it gives its power to something else. It was playing Ouroboros. It was actually super sweet. And then it was also, for interaction, it was playing stuff like Into the Flood Maw, so it was a great way to interact. Again, for 1 mana, just bounce a big creature or get rid of Cauldron or something like that. And then, I forget what it's called, the 3 mana 3/4 guy that makes maps. That one was also pretty good. So yeah, overall, we went to 3 games, and I was able to combo kill in 2 of them. But in the second one, just went too big. The Ouroboros went too wide on the board, and then I wasn't able to get there. We did have a pretty sick line at the end where we got to do the double combat thing with profs and the FOMO, and that's always a good time. And timing the bounce spells exactly right. Round 5, this was another loss, unfortunately. We lost in 3 games to Golgari Roots. This one, it's actually a matchup I hadn't played. That's the other thing. I haven't really played that much with this deck. I've been focusing a lot on limited RCQs and whatnot, and arena opens, etc., etc. But anyway, in any case, so the Golgari Roots deck, so very tricky matchup. I win a quick game 1 just because he gets stuck on 2 lands and it just doesn't really play Magic. But game 2, it's just really hard when they go off and they make a ton of tokens. First of all, a bunch of chump blockers. Second of all, more mana. And then it just snowballs out of control and you can't really do anything. And of course, you don't have stuff like Monstrous Rage anymore in the format to push through the trample damage on your big creatures. They just chump block forever, and it's just you can't possibly have enough 1-for-1s once they get going with the eponymous card. And in game 3, it was a very interesting game of like chicken, where my opponent, he had the Scavenging Ooze and only 1 mana up. And I let him go to untaps, and I was holding up like 1 mana, and I was thinking, oh, I'm going to hold up this Into the Flood Maw for a Roots. But what I should have done was, he only had 1 mana up, and the Scooz was still at 2/2. I should have just sacrificed a Profs and bargained a Torch to kill it right away, because the Scooz really messes up your Vivi Cauldron plan, because they're just able to constantly exile stuff. They can also exile stuff from their own graveyard, trigger their Roots. So yeah, maybe I was just a little worried about tapping out and then having him untap. But yeah, when you take away the Scooz, when you take away the enablers, the Roots don't do anything by themselves. So then he has to like commit more to board in order to start the combo again. So not saying I would have won that game or anything, but it was definitely close. I definitely it would have given me a good shot for sure. Then round 6, last round, basically the winning into top 8, because I had pretty good breakers, was, and also there was some weirdness with some unintentional draws, and so more X2s would make it, but whatever. So we played against Gruul Leyline, and we won in 2. Unfortunate mull to 4 from my opponent in game 1. Very, very sad. And then, he plays a creature, I kill it. It's just basically game over. Game 2 was very interesting as well. I was able to just tank a big hit of 13, and then, if he goes for the last pump spell, I am able to, interact. So he correctly does not, and then I go to my turn and I bait that last mana of his. It was a Snakeskin Veil. Then I play Cauldron, I like combo off, and I'm able to secure the board with a Flood Maw and a Fire Magic just to clean up the rest of the creatures. I have a couple creatures left on blocks, and then he's not able to push another threat through, even though I'm only at like 4 life. So it's pretty, always scary playing against the aggressive decks. But with all the Torch, especially, the Torch the Towers in the main, again, I said I would change that. Would not change that for this matchup. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we made it into the top 8 as the 7th seed. So in the quarterfinals, we played a nice tight game versus the same Dimir mid-range player that we played in the Swiss. We got our revenge. We were on the draw because, if you don't know, when you go into top 8, your play draw is not determined by a die roll. It is determined by how high your seed is. So I was 7th, and I think he was 2nd. Yeah, he would be 2nd place. So therefore, he got to decide to go first. But we won game 1. I think it was a very close back and forth kind of game, but he just overcommitted just a little too much. And then I was able to sneak out the combo and just make a ton of dragons with Draconox Engineer and all that jazz. Very, very fun and exciting. And then the second game, I just get out, mid-ranged or whatever, all the 1-for-1 removal, all that stuff I was talking about earlier. And then game 3 was very interesting. So let's see if I remember this exactly. It was, my opponent was at 2. And he had a flipped Cecil, which is the 4/4 lifelinker on the backside, and attacks and makes your other stuff indestructible. He had 5 mana, and he also had a Flood Pit's Drowner, the 2/1, that can stun something. Well, it stuns something on enters, and then you can pay 2 mana and shuffle away a thing. So he had 5 mana up, and I knew he had a Enduring Curiosity in hand because I Flood Mod it back to the hand the previous turn. So he has 5 mana. And I have 1 mana up only, and all I have on board is a tapped and stunned FOMO. It's very large. And a Prof's out. And I believe I'm at like 11 or 12, so fairly healthy life total. My opponent's at 2. Also notable, I have a Soulstone Sanctuary in my mana base and plenty of lands to like activate next turn. So keep that in mind. So my opponent goes to attack with the 4 and the 2, basically, the Cecil and the Flood Pits Drowner. And I say no block. I have a Flood Maw in hand, but I'm like, okay, well, I want you to act first. It would get really weird. I also did not want him to gain 4 life with the Cecil. But anyway, I say, no blocks. And then he decides to do the following. And it might be a little bit of fancy play syndrome. He pays 2 mana to shuffle away the FOMO, because again, it has a stun counter on it. So with the Flood Pits Drowner. But then he holds priority and ninjutsus out a Kaito with that trigger on the stack using the Flood Pits Drowner, which is a really cool play. But unfortunately, that left me able to just Flood Maw on the Cecil, and then I take 3 damage, and then he just like surveils, draws, doesn't draw land, and then I'm able to untap, activate the Soulstone Sanctuary, and attack for game. So I think what would have been better for him at that point was just to use honestly, do nothing, and then like maybe I'm forced to try to, I'm put in an awkward position because I don't know if I really want him to go to 6, so maybe I have to blink first with the Flood Maw, or you just flash in the Enduring Curiosity, try to draw cards, and then even if I even if I bounce the Cecil back to hand, you could just recast. So I think maybe a little bit of fancy play syndrome there from my opponent. So then the semifinals would have been versus a Sultai control list, but did some prize redistribution because I asked, are you interested in getting the invite? He said he was not. So we did a little bit of prize redistribution. So basically I got the win for a little bit less credit. Well, significantly less credit, but that's okay, because what I really care about, of course, you already know, the invite, which we got. Very exciting. So yeah, I think that would have been an interesting matchup because, well, one, I haven't really played against Sultai Control, but I imagine you would treat it a lot of the same way as like the Blue-White Control list, but there's probably just some different things you have to, watch out for and stuff. But I'd probably do like the same plan for the sideboarding. But anyway, so at that point we got our invite, which because it's a 2-slotter, but there was still the lanyard to play for, and I enjoy having a few lanyards, but I wanted to earn that one. So I played in the finals against Mono Red Dragons, and of course at this point he already has his invite as well. That was a little bit more laid back, casual, kind of, we're just joking around because a little bit less stressful, but we both want the lanyard. I win a quick game 1. He gets stuck on 2 lands. I combo. It's kind of disgusting. It's ridiculous. Game 2 was a little bit more interesting, but ultimately I do end up getting there. Just a nice, well-timed Flood Maw on the Nova Hellkite, and then he just doesn't have enough mana to do everything that he needs to in order to kill me. I was at 9. I think the most he could have done theoretically was 8 with maybe like 2 Nova Hellkites warped out or something like that, but yeah, I was just able to get a little too much value. So kind of like a non-match, sort of, versus that deck. I think that deck's really interesting. It has really cool play patterns. For example, you go turn 1, Hired Claw, turn 2, Magda, and then you attack with the Hired Claw. It commits a crime because it's target opponent, so you make a tap treasure. Then you untap it, you make 4 mana. You have 4 mana. So I think that's overall a really cool deck, and I think once Vivi gets banned, it's going to be interesting to see how the meta shakes out. I think there's a lot of really sweet decks out there. There was another list out there that was playing like Wily Duke, and then Kona with Valgavoth and the green and white planets. Really, really sick stuff. So overall, had a good time, and of course, happy to get the invite thanks to my good friends Vivi and the Cauldron, my favorite sitcom. So hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of a different kind of video. Now comes the fun part where I get to edit this thing. I'm just going to probably try to add some card images and whatnot. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one.
I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you guys all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the deck tech and tournament recap of my RCQ winning Vivi Cauldron stuffs. See you later.